Welcome back. Another video on preparing for the ISEE. Today I want to look specifically at one portion of the verbal reasoning section. That is the sentence completions. How do we want to approach sentence completions on the ISEE? First and foremost, vocabulary. These questions often come down to simply knowing the words. And if you know them, you're going to get the question right. And if you don't, you won't necessarily get it wrong, but it becomes a lot more difficult. However, the entirety of how we approach sentence completions can't just be make sure you know the words. First of all, because that might mess up our pacing. Second of all, because the psychometricians who are writing these questions know how to throw students off. What do I mean by that? Well, consider a sentence like the following. Of all the ancient Greek playwrights, Aristophanes, who wrote the play Lysistrata, was one of the most blank. The typical student approach is going to be to read this sentence and then to read in each of the four answer choices, looking for which one sounds like it fits in the blank. The problem is that the psychometricians know students do this, and so I promise you they have found multiple words that sound as if they could fit in the blank. Of all the ancient Greek playwrights, Aristophanes, who wrote the play Lysistrata, was one of the most famous. And I think to myself, well, we're still using his name on a standardized test 2,000 years later, so yeah, I guess that makes sense. Of all the ancient Greek playwrights, Aristophanes, who wrote the play Lysistrata, was one of the most controversial. And I think to myself, well, I'm not really an expert on Greek playwriting or politics, and so maybe he was controversial, I don't know. Of all the ancient Greek playwrights, Aristophanes, who wrote the play Lysistrata, was one of the most creative. And I think, well, he was a playwright, so yeah, he must have been a little bit creative. Of all the ancient Greek playwrights, Aristophanes, who wrote the play Lysistrata, was one of the most conservative. And even if I think to myself right now, well, probably they're not going to get super political on the ISEE, so maybe I can say it's not B or it's not D, I have just read this same sentence 5 times, and at best, I have a 1 in 2 chance of getting it correct. That's not a good scenario. And so for the most part, this is not how we want to approach sentence completions. I definitely do not want to read this same sentence 5 different times. That is a waste of my time. But I also don't want to just be reading the answer choices in, because I know the psychometricians are finding other words that sound as if they could fit in the blank. And so what I want you to do when you approach these sentence completions is literally cover up your answers. Cover them up. They're going to influence you. You want to ignore them as much as possible. And instead, you're going to read the sentence and fill in the blank with your own word. Fill in the blank yourself. There has to be something in the sentence that tells you what goes in the blank. Otherwise, the psychometricians couldn't say this answer is right and that answer is wrong. That's what we call the clue. This is what I mean when I say you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes. He was a detective, right? He looked for clues. In the 1960s, the atmosphere of the country could best be described as blank. There was a great deal of social change in a small period of time. Well, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking to myself, great deal of social change, small period of time. So if there was a great deal of change in a short period of time, I'm going to say something like the atmosphere of the country could best be described as up in the air. Like, I don't even need to think of one particular word, just the idea everything is changing. We don't really know what precisely is going on. And now that I have my own fill in the blank, I'm going to look at the answers, but I'm not going to read them back into the sentence 4 times like we did earlier. I'm simply going to ask myself, does this word mean something like my own word or phrase that I used to fill in the blank? Does agrarian mean something like up in the air or all kinds of things are changing? No. So I cross off A. Does tumultuous mean something like up in the air or all kinds of things are changing? Yes. So I keep answer choice B. Does implacable mean everything is changing, things are up in the air right now? No. Now again, maybe we don't know, right? Maybe we don't know what implacable means, and we never cross off an answer choice that we don't know the meaning of the word for. So I'm just going to leave C here, but it doesn't really seem to fit. Does placid mean something like up in the air or everything's changing? No. If anything, it's the opposite. So I can cross off D and circle answer choice B. You can see the psychometricians could easily take the same stem and just by changing the clue, change the word that would fit in this blank. This is why the clue is so important. This sentence could just as easily have read, in the 1960s, the atmosphere of the country could best be described as blank. Few events of note took place. So now very little is happening. And I would say something like placid instead of tumultuous. It all depends on what that clue is. So if you're having trouble filling in what goes in the blank, look for the clue. look for the most descriptive part of the sentence. All right, so again, we're going to try to ignore our answer choices here and fill in the blank ourselves, looking for that most descriptive part of the sentence. The mechanism that led to the Big Bang is blank, and therefore scientists can only offer guesses as to what caused it. Well, if scientists can only offer guesses, then the mechanism that led to the Big Bang must be something like unknown, or we might even just reuse that most descriptive part of the sentence. We might just say they can only offer a guess. Now we can reveal our answer choices and we can see understood, that doesn't mean unknown, cross off A. Unknown, yes, this is best case scenario, but we don't want to go ahead and pick B. We always check all 4 answers. Obvious? No, it's not obvious. It's a guess. Cosmic, you can see, is a trap because we're talking about the universe, but it's not what we're looking for here, even though it sounds good in the blank, because we know we needed something that meant a guess, a hypothesis. B, unknown. Let's do it again. As energy sources like wind power and solar power begin to surpass the affordability of non-renewable resources, states that have come to rely on the fossil fuel industry will have to blank their economies or otherwise find themselves falling behind. Well, again, I want to look for the most descriptive parts of this sentence. So something is changing, certain energy sources are becoming more affordable, and so specifically states that rely on the fossil fuel industry, which is the one that is being surpassed now in affordability, they're going to have to change their economies or otherwise find themselves falling behind. So would that be A, recline their economies? No, recline doesn't mean anything like change. Invert their economies? No, we're not flipping anything upside down. Adapt their economies? Yes, adapt means something like change. Remain their economies? No, again, we wanted change, and so C is going to be the best answer choice here. The wedding guests looked on with every expectation that the marriage would stand the test of time, as the couple had such blank personalities. Well, what kinds of personalities must they have if we think their marriage is going to last? We might say something like nice personalities, or, amenable, flexible, something where we can say, all right, yeah, they're going to be able to get along for a while. So would that be opposite personalities? I mean, they do say that opposites attract, but if we're saying they're going to be together for a long time, there's no special reason you would want to say, yeah, actually they're super opposite of each other. So I don't really like A. Bombastic personalities, like really loud. There's no special reason you'd think being loud would either help you stay together or not, so I don't like B. Quiet personalities, having had such complementary personalities. And this could be a little confusing because compliment with an I means you say nice things about people, which actually kind of fits here if you think about it, but that's not quite what's going on. Complementary means they fit well together. So yes, answer choice D is going to most match our amenable or flexible word that we came up with. You can see now, having done a few of these, the strategy quickly becomes second nature, and it saves us so much time. You read the sentence, you fill in the blank. If you have trouble filling in the blank, you look for that most descriptive part of the sentence that the psychometricians must be using for the right answer choice. Modern music production is a blank effort, as the performer, songwriter, producer, sound engineer, and many others must work together to create a track. Well, what's important here is you have a bunch of people working together. So we might say something like it is a team effort. As I go to the answer choices, does synthetic mean team? No. Cross off A. Does joint? Yes. Keep answer choice B. Does contemporary? No, not really. Inauthentic? No. And so B, joint, is going to be our best answer. Let's do it again. Number 7 here. The weather app had indicated that the storm was blank, but the foreboding clouds and abrupt decrease in temperature proved otherwise. The weather app must have said something like it was far away, because I'm surprised now that the temperature has decreased so quickly and the clouds are right here. It has proved otherwise. And so as I go to the choices, the weather app showed that the storm was distant. Yeah, I like answer choice A. Imminent? No, it's the opposite. I'm surprised the storm is coming on so strong. So it's not B. Diminishing? No, it seems like it's about to start, not finish up. Elevated doesn't really make any sense here at all, and so it's got to be answer choice A. One thing you'll notice in this case, though, is that both otherwise and the word but told me that what was going to fill in the blank was actually the opposite of that most descriptive part of the sentence. This is what we call a direction word. Some words, but, whereas, while, or indicate that we need to change directions from whatever the clue says. And then there are some words like and, also, so, therefore, even sometimes punctuation like the colon or the semicolon that indicate our blank should definitely agree with whatever the most descriptive part of the sentence is. These direction words further help us fill out what's in the blank. So again, if you're having trouble filling in the blank, you look for that most descriptive part of the sentence and you look for these kinds of direction words. Let's do that on number 9 here. In the cooler and wetter climate of the 1970s, the extensive redwood forests of Northern California thrived, but these same forests were blanked by drought conditions and wildfires at the turn of the century. Well, if initially the forests had thrived, but now something else is happening, it must be something like these same forests were dying or hurt by drought conditions and wildfires at the turn of the century. And so I'm going to go with basically the opposite of what the clue was, the most descriptive part of the sentence here. I want the opposite of thriving. A, they were dominated by the conditions. That does sound a little negative, but it doesn't quite fit in the sentence. Similarly, asserted isn't really the opposite of thriving. Extinguished also doesn't really mean the opposite of thriving. I think it's probably a trap based on the fact that we're talking about wildfires. So I'm going to get rid of C. Now, just because I've gotten rid of A, B, and C, it doesn't mean that D is the right answer. But of course, as I read devastated, yes, that fits here. They were dying, they were hurt by the drought conditions, they were devastated by the drought conditions. And so D is the best choice here. A couple more of these single blank sentence completions to practice. Number 9, the mayoral candidate saw his campaign survive accusations of corruption, though it had certainly been blank by the false allegations. So again, the most descriptive part is that the campaign survived, though it had certainly been, and again, you can see we can often just go with things like help or hurt, positives or negatives in these blanks, though it had certainly been hurt by the false allegations. Does marshaled mean hurt? No, not really. Does enervated mean hurt? Maybe we don't know, right? Give it the question mark. We never get rid of answer choices if we don't know the meanings of the words. It had been energized by the false allegations? That definitely doesn't make sense. Pursued by the false allegations? Again, that's an answer that sounds like it fits in the blank, but we're looking for hurt, and pursued doesn't specifically mean hurt. So even if we don't know what enervated means, probably B is the best answer choice here. This is a great example of what we do when we don't know what a word means. At this point, if you don't know what enervated means, write it down on a flashcard and write down its dictionary style definition, which is something like to reduce energy or to reduce vitality. And we can see now why it fits here for hurt by the false allegations. All right, one more, number 10. Initially, the union negotiators blanked the tenets outlined by the federal mediator, but they soon acknowledged that the recommendations were a good middle ground. Initially is what we call a time direction word. And pretty much any time is involved, it's probably meaning a change direction. If I say England was once the greatest empire on earth, what I mean is that they're not anymore. So if they soon acknowledged that the recommendations were a good middle ground, initially they must have disliked the tenets or something like that. Or maybe even, threw away, said no to the tenets outlined by the federal mediator. As I go to the answers, they embraced the tenets. No, it's the opposite. We're pushing them away. They rejected the tenets. Yes. They considered them. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but that's not the direction this sentence is going. They publicized them. No, not at all. So B is going to be the best answer here. Now, you're probably aware sentence completions on the ISEE actually come in one of two flavors: single blank sentence completions and double blank sentence completions. The great thing is that the strategy is the same either way. If you have two blanks, just start with the easier blank, fill that one in, and then use that to help you fill in the other blank. So in this particular case, number 11, while there is no doubt that Gael Monfils is a blank tennis player, it is his penchant for trick shots rather than his blank ability that has brought him worldwide acclaim. Which of these two blanks is easier to fill in? I think it's probably the second blank that we can fill in first. We do have this direction word rather than, so it's his penchant for trick shots, and I want the opposite of something like that. So rather than his, what's the opposite of trick shots? Maybe something like fundamental ability. And in fact, now that I've filled out that second part of the sentence, even looking at the first part, while there is no doubt that Gael Monfils is a skilled tennis player, something that kind of fits with fundamental, I'll go with skilled here. And now I can go ahead and remove my hand from the answer choices. And then I'm just going to go one blank at a time. Does well-known mean skilled? No, so I can cross off A. Gifted? Yeah, I can keep B. Flashy? No, that's actually the opposite of what we're looking for. And corrupt really doesn't fit here, so just based on the first blank, I'm already thinking it's answer choice B. Does technical ability mean something like fundamental ability? Yes, and so I like answer choice B. Let's practice a couple more of these. Comedy in the modern age draws a sharp contrast to the blank nature of ancient comedy. In the ancient view, the most natural subject of comedy is the life of the city and the institutions that animated it, rather than the more modern focus on blank connection. So if what used to be the focus was the life of the city and institutions that animated it, we might say that ancient comedy was very global or maybe even political if it's based on the life of the city and the institutions in the city. And so today we need something that is the opposite of global or political. We might go on something like one-on-one connection, person to person rather than this more institutional kind of focus. For the first blank, global, political, widespread, yeah, maybe. Ephemeral, not lasting very long, no, that doesn't fit. Absurd, I mean, comedy in general is sometimes absurd, but you can see that's just kind of a trap here. It doesn't have anything to do with being global or political. D, political, we love it whenever this happens. Now we go to the second blank. Would the more modern focus be on broad connection? No. We had this change direction word rather than, and so we don't want something that means basically the same thing as the first blank. So now I can cross off A. And personal connection, yes, that works for one-on-one. Now I said for the most part, these two blank sentence completions, you can use the same strategy as with one blank sentence completions, but that's not 100% true. Consider something like this last problem, number 13. Trinity was a blank student, so she expected blank for her work. In this case, I could fill this in with something like Trinity was an excellent student, so she expected praise for her work. But I could just as easily say something like Trinity was a terrible student, so she expected rejection or, censure for her work or something. In other words, what's going on here is not that there's a particular word that needs to fill in, but instead there's a relationship. Either both of these blanks are positive or they're both negative. Basically what's happened here is the psychometricians have used the most descriptive part of the sentence as the blank itself. And so we're going to have to select among these answer choices using the relationship, not the actual words we can fill in. In this case, essentially what's happening is that what would have been the most descriptive part of the sentence is now the blank. We can definitely still rely on our direction words, so is part of what's telling us the relationship between these blanks needs to be the same, positive, positive, or negative, negative. But as we go to the answer choices, either one of these could work out. Positive for the first blank, positive for the second, or negative for the first blank, negative for the second. So at this stage, really, we do just have to look at the answers. We can't necessarily come up with our own words, although we could come up with several examples. Indolent is negative. It means lazy. Compensation is kind of neutral, neither positive nor negative, and so we could say that's really not going to work in this particular scenario. Appropriate is not super positive or negative, so again, organization, same thing, really isn't going to work on a question like this. Arduous, working hard, you could think of it as negative, but also it can be a positive thing. Slander, yeah, maybe, so maybe I'm going to keep C here. But answer choice D is pretty clearly the better choice. Assiduous means she is a hard worker, and so of course she would expect praise or approbation for her work, and so D is going to end up being the better choice. All right, quick review on our sentence completion strategy. Cover up those answer choices. Don't let the psychometricians influence what you're doing. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that you should be looking for clues. You are a detective. Look for the most descriptive part of the sentence because that's what the psychometricians are using to make the right answer the right answer. Fill in the blank on your own using that most descriptive part of the sentence, and if you need to, any kind of direction words. Are we going the same direction as the most descriptive part of the sentence, or are we changing directions? And of course, as always, do your verbal scratch work. Process of elimination. Make sure you're marking up these answer choices and not trying to keep all that data in your head. Write down your own words if you need to as you compare the answer choices to your word. I've got a drill here. If you look in the description down below, you can download a PDF with, I think, 5 questions, sentence completions you can use to practice this strategy. Comment if you have any questions. Let me know if you need to know what are the answers, A, B, C, D. Make sure you're writing down any vocabulary that's unfamiliar to you and studying that vocabulary as you get closer to your test date. And if you want to see more videos like this, of course, like and subscribe. I will see y'all next time.